All right, Shan. Well, we are quickly rolling into March. First of all, I can't believe we're already in March as we are going to round up everything that happened in February in the surfing world as we normally do. We also get to talk about the fact that you and I got to spend some time together in February. That was all kind of, well, it happened quite spur of the moment, which was so nice.
Literally like 24 hours, within 24 hours, Rachel texted us to say, hey, so I'm going to be in Australia tomorrow. Are you guys free? And I was thinking like, oh, she must have forgotten. She booked her flights like sometime this week to like remind us of a layover coming. Anyways, she had just booked her flight and was flying out the same night or the next day.
Yeah. No, the same night.
So funny. But it meant that we got about 8 hours together in Sydney.
It was awesome.
It was a beautiful day.
It was so awesome. Good.
I quote that you said the hike that we went on was your most favorite hike you've ever been on.
Yes.
Does that still stand?
So,
like if you reflect now back on like
yeah. Because I had a couple of criteria around that. I'm not like some huge hiker who like loves to like sprint up mountains or anything. I love going on a walk or, whatever. But it was like a nice, but I love like scenery. Like I'm not just ever walking to walk. Like I like going on a hike when it's like the end is a waterfall or like a beach or a beautiful view or something. And this is like the issue I have with hikes kind of in Southern California is you're just like hiking over like dead hills. And this was the opposite of that.
Talk about that a lot.
And it had like
while we were on this.
Yeah, I know. I kept bringing it up because I was like, this is the opposite of that. It's so good. So, it has a beautiful, nice walkway that is about 3 feet above all the brush. So we didn't have to worry about snakes. We hiked to the prettiest little beach ever, got to swim, and then got to change back into our like walking outfits. And it was never strenuous. Like I felt like I had a good little exercise by the end of it, but I was never like dying. So I got to really be present and enjoy the whole time. And we just got to chat, which was nice because I feel like, especially too on hikes where you're like just going up a steep hill the whole time, you're like, and trying to catch your breath.
Just currently me walking up like my driveway even. It's flat. It's completely flat. 2 steps to get from the ground level to my front door to start going out of breath. But that's due to having a growing belly at the moment, which is pretty funny. But yeah, it was like, it's a pretty ideal. Hiking through the Royal National Park outside, it's like just on the south side of Sydney, which divides the area that we live in from Sydney. It's like really nice. There's so many good hikes and it's like, there's lots of great cliffs. There's lots of little beaches in between things and stuff. So yeah, the hike to Little Marley is one that I've done like years ago. I hadn't done it I've only done it once before. And I had this like memory of it being really good, but I just couldn't, I don't know. It had been a long time. I've done a lot of hikes in the meantime and it fully ticked all the boxes. It was really fun.
Yeah, I loved it. And it actually worked out perfect because I booked my flight the day of leaving.
The day of.
So, the flight's not until it wasn't until 10 p.m. and I booked it at 9 a.m. So I had all day, to pack and do that stuff. So it wasn't like it was some crazy rush. However, the cheapest one was the fact that because we're flying up to the Gold Coast, the cheapest to book that day meant that we had a 10-hour layover in Sydney. So my brother and I, who I'm traveling with my brother throughout this, we were like, oh, well, I'm sure we can figure out something to do in Sydney. And so I immediately text you guys and both you guys just happen to have the day off. And you're like, yep, we'll come get you guys from the airport and we'll go explore. And then we got dropped back off and it was just way better than actually going straight to the Gold Coast because we got to have the day that we did.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
So thank you very much.
You're so welcome. What are you doing in Australia for? How long are you here for? Have you decided yet?
I think I'm going to stay for another... Well, we haven't talked about this, but my plan at the moment is my brother's leaving at the end of this week. I think I'll stay one more week on the Gold Coast. And then I'm thinking I'll come stay with you guys for a week.
Fantastic.
And
You're
then,
welcome anytime. You can sleep right here next to the record player and between the surfboards. It's yours.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I'm thinking I'll come down to Sydney and then come down towards you guys, spend some time with you guys. And then my friend Claudia, who I'm a bridesmaid for, is picking up her wedding dress that we went shopping for it in July last year in Sydney. And now it's like ready to be picked up. And they're arriving at like March, at the end of March. And so I was like, well, that actually might work out perfect because then I can just link back up with them in Sydney to get the wedding dress. So this is the itinerary that I'm thinking right now. We do have a cyclone on our way to the Gold Coast right now, and it is supposed to hit on Wednesday. So I'm not sure what, well, I guess we can expect a lot of rain and weather. I'm not sure if that will end up changing plans at all.
Well, I love those plans. I love the idea of you spending more time down here, and I can take you to some of my other favorite spots down the coast. Hopefully we get some waves. I would also be stoked for you if the weather coming to the Gold Coast means you get really good surf, but I don't want it to tap into you coming down here. So I've got like fingers crossed as I'm saying. I hope that you guys get really good surf. I'd like to be up there surfing some
Yeah, well, we do have surf on the way, but now it's like washed out. It's the Gold Coast now is already like 10 plus feet and you can't surf it.
Oh,
yeah. And crazy. Like the cyclone's actually supposed to hit us in 2 days, like directly.
Right. Okay.
So it's like gone. So now it's come too close for like we're getting weather. Yeah. Like we're getting swell, but now it's too much swell that it's actually just like we had a great run of swell last week as it was like coming. And now it's like getting close that it's just like.
Okay. Well.
So we'll see. Anyways.
Sunny skies down here. Come anytime. But yeah, that is really fun. And I'm also so excited for when Claudia's wedding is because it pretty much times out with like just after I will have this baby. So you get to also come meet your goddaughter in July.
I know. Yay.
Oh, I thought you said no.
I'm very excited.
Just a little glitch for a second. Yeah. I was like, wait, why? No, what's happening? Yes. So
yes.
excited.
Yeah. I am very excited.
So fun. Well, stoked that you're in Australia. I'm stoked that you and Michael get to have this trip together. I know it's his first time being back here in so many years. Yeah. So I'm sure that's been really sweet.
Yeah, it has. We've been super busy just like catching up with people every day. We've had like dinner or coffee or something with someone and it's been the best in the best way. So we're up on the sunny coast right now and I'm recording from my friend Harry's office and you can't see it in the background. If you're watching the video version, you can see those trophies. He's a race car driver and those are all his trophies. So his brother, Nick Jones, some of our listeners may be familiar with because he used to surf on the longboard tour with me. And now we're at his we just took a tour of all his race car shed and everything and got to see the cars. And it was super, super neat. So we are here catching up with him and his wife, Em. They are also expecting a baby now too. Aww, Shannon, I'm just exciting. Surrounded by it. Yeah.
Well, it kind of leads us perfectly then into the conversation for our
into our start
and our number one topic for that conversation. Well, speaking of babies, my own little baby is grown now to the halfway mark, which is so wild. I'm halfway through pregnancy. Aaron and I did eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's half-baked ice cream last night. It was great. There's a whole trend going around that somebody we randomly ran into was like, you have to do this. And we were like, we're doing it. We're also not going to
really
film it or take photos and put it on social media, but we're going to go and get the ice cream and eat it. But not actually.
Half-baked.
Half-baked.
As in you're half-baked and you're eating half-baked ice cream. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That took me way too long to put together, but I'm following now. I love
we
that.
Also went someone flagged it with us and we were like, huh? And then they explained it. We were like, oh, right. Okay. Also, now I realize I have seen a couple things like that on social media. Speaking, though, of fully baked babies, well, there's just a lot of babies happening in the surf community right now. So we thought we'd give a little bit of love to those families. Fully baked, Carissa Moore just had little Olena just a few days ago. and she's made it home. It looks like they are adjusting to life together, so that is really, really exciting. Joanne DeFay has announced that she is currently pregnant, so that is why she missed Surfing Pipeline, came to Abu Dhabi to put a jersey on, which is
great
awesome.
Reason.
Great reason to miss Pipe. Great decision making too, because that is a gnarly wave, obviously. And she's going to kind of just, likely take most of the season off, but sounds like she's going to surf in Portugal, which is awesome, and then kind of go from there and see how she's feeling, which is very understandable.
Yeah, in addition to that, we've already spoken about Honolulu, but Honolulu is expecting her baby in April, which, speaking of, I just think it's so cool. So many of these women competing while pregnant and just like pushing that conversation, that narrative. We had Carissa actually competing at the Olympics at Chopu. Obviously, we have Joanne competing and then announcing. Honolulu was, I think, 12 or 13 weeks when we were at our finals competing for the world title.
Yeah, she was almost
in El
pregnant
Salvador,
for the
which
whole
meant
tour last year, huh?
Yeah. And she just had her baby shower yesterday, which I was so sad to have missed because I'm not in Hawaii right now, but she's getting ready to have her baby. Well, it's March now, so next month. It's super exciting.
So wild. And then when it comes to men on the championship tour and their spouses having babies, Connor O'Leary and his wife, Steph O'Leary, is pregnant and due near, I think it's like literally a day apart from Ryan Callanan and his wife, Nina, who are also having a baby. And they're like best friends on tour. They travel together all the time. The wives are good friends. Steph is, of course, an all-time great of Australian surfing. She has been like a real threat on that side of things for so many years and has stepped away from competing probably over the last 5 years or so now. So really exciting to see a couple new little faces that will be joining the championship tour from the men's side of things with their partners in tow.
Well, taking that conversation forward and speaking of retirement, we also saw Bronte Macaulay announce her official retirement from competing, Shan.
Yeah, it's a really kind of bittersweet one. It's exciting to see that she's entering a new stage of life, that her and her partner they've been working on building a house and she's getting lots of free surfing in and just kind of connecting back into home and really putting her roots down after spending so much time on the road for so many years. But it's really sad to know that she is stepping away because she's still one of those surfers that really is I think when she's out on a board and she's in good waves, she's at the absolute top of her game. But unfortunately has just missed out on those opportunities to requalify for the women's tour over the last couple of seasons. And it's been kind of those really close chances to get herself back off of the Challenger Series onto the CT. And I guess I respect at this stage that decision to just having put in a lot of effort, having had a very, very highly successful career over so many years across all of the tours, to now just decide to take a step back and move into a different phase of life.
Yeah, I also, and I've, gone through this in my own career and mine before. Like, I feel like too, you just get to a point where you're like, what more am I looking for out of competition? And that could be like, well, I have these goals to hit these results or whatever. But when you do really have to organize your life to be on hold in a lot of ways, a lot of ways in order to chase that. And you do get to the point where you're like, I'm ready to experience like something different, whether that's still traveling and chasing different waves that are different to the ones you're competing on tour every year, as we're seeing Steph do for her second time around.
Yeah. Or
Bronte stepping into her new phase of life as she's stepping away from just traveling solely for competing. It actually, it baffles me how Kelly has done it for so long or did it for so long, because like you get to this point that you're just like, don't you want to like do something different? And I'm really excited for her in the fact that she can step away, really proud with the career that she's had, and step into some new things. Obviously, it's not us finishing seeing her surfing, and she's an incredible surfer. So I look forward to what she can produce out of this next stage.
Yeah, that's going to be really exciting to see. So Bronte, we're going to miss you on tour, but we're excited to see what comes next in your life. Kind of flipping now to the opposite, like a newer generation of surfers. Alyssa Spencer has just dropped a new edit. I just took a look at it before we started recording. It's only about 3 minutes long, so it's kind of short and sweet, but some time that she spent in Hawaii. I think it was called Island Vibes. And it's in partnership with Surfline, and they do like a Sunday sessions kind of release. So that's just popped out with them today. But yes, some great surfing, couple little barrels at Pipe, and some heavier waves, or you can see like some sizier days at Haleiwa and that sort of stuff. So stoked to see that Alyssa is still keeping her surfing super sharp. She is a surfer out of Southern California who we have chatted to before on the podcast. She's also, had made it onto the championship tour, missed that midseason cut, and has just kind of used that fire of missing out on that to continue pouring in and knowing this is what she wants to be chasing for a long time to come.
Yeah, and looks like they've been having a really fun winter on the North Shore as well. They've been getting plenty of surf, so it was fun to see some of the clips produced out of that.
So true. Even thinking of that, I was trying to have a look to see if there's a proper edit. I haven't seen one yet. If one pops out, we'll definitely make sure to share it with everybody. But there's been like so many like cool waves that Honolua has been putting on her social media, just of her like surfing at home in waves that she's comfortable with, like at the beach break or at Haleiwa. Auntie Meg's as well. There's like a couple of the longboarders that have been out there and just getting such good content and kind of showcasing, when we talk about Auntie Meg surfing, she's a well-rounded longboarder, right? She's not a traditional longboarder by any means. She's actually, sits really quite heavily in that high performance conversation, but she's just out in the mix, and she's setting a great example for those young and up and coming surfers, doing a lot of coaching with them as well. So there has been some really cool footage that's just dropped out across the board from that North Shore contingency, whether it's shortboarders or longboarders over the last month or so. And one last thing we wanted to tap on before moving forward into our big contest conversations for this episode is the fact that there is a 11-time event that runs in Portugal. For the first time ever, they've invited women into that conversation, which we love to see. It's called Capitulo Perfeito in Portuguese. In English, it translates to perfect chapter.
I think that was pretty good.
Thank you. That was my, third time trying it before we were actually recording it. But yeah, it's like really cool event. It's like basically it is for the previous 10 years, it has been a men's event that is mostly barrel specialists with invitees around the world. For this year, women being invited in was just Portuguese women. There was 4 of them. Our friend Yolanda Hopkins ended up taking out the win, which is no surprise with the type of surfing that we see her, kind of bringing to the table every day of the week. But she was in the heat alongside of Camila Cardosa, Gabriela Denise, and Maria Salgado for that first opportunity for women to be surfing in Capitulo Perfeito.
Yeah, it looked like it was at the same break that we see the surfers compete at Super Tubos, but maybe just farther down the beach there. So stoked to see Yolanda take that away, though, as such a talented group of women there. No surprise to see Yolanda take that, though, as she is just such a force to be reckoned with.
Well, focusing the rest of our conversation for this episode, Rachel, on surf contests, the contest corner. Our only events that we have really to review is Abu Dhabi, Surf Abu Dhabi Pro, and Natural Selection Surf. So we're going to chat first about the Abu Dhabi event. And kind of give some weight to the conversation. There's been a lot of chatter around it. It's been a couple weeks now since that event actually took place in the Middle East. And I don't know. I guess I'm just going to throw it to you straight away and ask what your overall thoughts are.
My overall thoughts are, I'm not surprised that Katie took the win. I think the biggest challenge for surfers at the wave pool is not getting too wrapped up in, I'm not going to say not getting too wrapped up, because it is important, I think, the choreography of the wave. And that's something we talked about prior to the event or in our last episode. But Katie was able to bring in a little bit of an air of that, that lack of choreography feeling. And it kept things really exciting and fresh.
Yeah, like actual creativity that's not like creativity that's then being reproduced over and over again, wave after wave. Like you see one wave and you're like, yeah, cool, that was really cool and creative, their approach. And then, oh, the next wave is just them trying to now perfect what they did on the last one and kind of repetitive like that. Katie was genuinely trying some different things, mainly the roundhouse cutback on the opening section that no one's tried.
Yeah.
She tried it for a couple of waves, apparently in a free surf. Like on her waves in the warm-up sessions, and then in the early rounds was unable to be successful in even completing that opening roundhouse, and then came back through the semis and the finals to capitalize on that, which added like a really fresh, exciting, creative element to things with so much speed, with so much flow, and then comboed that up with some insane surfing beyond it, which then really made it for like a very kind of, like you said, no surprises that she's taking the win when she's able to approach things that way, but also keeping the speed and flow within her surfing doing that.
And taking that conversation further than seeing Molly in the final as well. Again, it actually feels really good. I feel like when we kind of put ourselves out there in an episode and we're like, man, it feels like Molly and Katie and Tyler was our takeaways from Pipe. And that we see, again, Molly and Katie in the finals. I think that is just really showing their standout nature. And it is pretty cool to be seeing these women no longer, I mean, I know they've been like the new generation for, you know, quote unquote generation for a while now. So they're not rookies anymore, but they're the top of the field.
Yeah, I think that was pretty evident in the way that this event rolled out. It's like one of the pretty big, I guess, conversation points to it that we can get into like a little bit deeper is the fact that those that are fresher to the tour, whether it's reigning world champion Katie Simmers, Molly Picklum in that conversation, Gabby Avahine, some of those younger surfers, Bella Kenworthy, what they were bringing in their surfing was so flawless in a lot of different elements that the wave pool allowed them to like highlight, that it showed a pretty big difference between the surfing that we're seeing from the veterans that are on tour, you know, from those surfers that have been sitting at the top of the pack when it comes to wave pool surfing, the surfing they brought year after year that has given them those opportunities to take away wins and had them as big standouts. So we've been so stoked on in those events. Now you can see that there is that generational leap, that divide into the next pack that's coming through is really like quite drastic when it comes to surfing a wave like that in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. And I think this kind of loops back to a conversation that we've had last year before, which was, or maybe, I think it was last year. Anyways, the timing of this conversation is not important. But we were talking about the surfers that are on tour for longer. What they have in their like arsenal is a lot of heat experience and strategy and all of that at these particular waves that gives them those edges over when like rookies are coming in. And that's where we are seeing those veterans continuously rise to the top in prior to the mid-season cut, because we're going to so many waves that were already surfed at, and that these veterans have spent so many countless of years, you know, perfecting and knowing how to read and knowing and having that contest experience there. And I think we're in such a different, a venue like this really has allowed, my final thought of where I was taking that was on the flip side, the years of contest surfing, I do think can stunt your surfing and stunts you at a particular place. And then that's why we see so often, year after year, you see these new generation surfers come up on men's and women's, as we've seen it, Lane Beachley coming in after Lisa Anderson, and then Steph coming in after Lane. We see these generational turnovers happen, and it always looks like this new generation surfers coming in so fresh, and it's like, wow, where have they, like, and it's not that that veteran couldn't do that previously, of course, or can't do that, but I think coming off of not being on tour and surfing a bunch of different styles of waves, not spending so much time in contest jerseys, but being intentional about understanding strategy and all of that allows you to come in with this this freshness and this spark in your surfing that really stands out. And then this venue, I think in specific, no one really going in with a large upper hand in terms of experience really allowed that to play out.
Yeah, that's so true. Like those surfers from each of the previous generations have had the ability likely to surf to what we're seeing, but hadn't been pushed because that's not where the sport was at for the development of women surfing on that stage. Then taking that into the context of judging and heat time and the waves that they're surfing on tour for a lot of those years of a Lakey, of a Joanne, of a Carissa, etc. Tyler, they're all surfing waves that are more lackluster. They're not super exciting. The judging within that is then rewarding stuff that isn't necessarily pushing them to the like having to break barriers. And so it kind of allowed that pack to sit in a certain, like, I don't even know the right word to use, but just kind of like sit on a certain scale within their surfing. And now this next generation coming in, we've already seen that when it comes to kind of those bigger, heavier waves in that conversation. Now to be able to see some of those things that are a little bit more like the finesse in their surfing. We saw some aerial attempts, that creativity and that approach to really just be themselves on a wave as well is coming through a lot within that next generation, which is exciting. I'd like to go back to kind of some of the format conversations around this before we get a little bit deeper into like a Katie versus Molly final chat first. When we're talking about the new event format for this, it was head to head as opposed to like a leaderboard. Do we think that's more exciting?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty good because it does seem to add actually a level of pressure, like maybe a better level of pressure into the conversation range. What do you think?
Yeah, it was the same type of format that we had when we competed. So at the wave pool last year. So to be honest, it didn't, until we were talking more recently about it, it didn't even jog my memory that it used to be the opposite format of the leaderboard. Right. I definitely think the setup of heats and all of that and that dynamic between two surfers paddling out, one standing on the side, and you know what you need to do in order to advance in that heat helps spark up that level of entertainment, especially in a wave pool format where it does get really repetitive, that it was hard to kind of compare when it was that leaderboard format to find, you know, you're making the audience, judge's job is for recall, you know, so they're recalling every other person's wave throughout that day to make sure they're scoring to scale and staying upon that. But it takes a lot of memory as a spectator to also force them to have that recall. So you're like invested in watching, where the heat kind of allows you to just be invested in that heat and compare two surfers and see who's actually advancing forward.
Yeah. And it is nice when it's like, okay, I'm going out there and I know that I need to just beat the person next to me to advance through. And I'm not going, I need to beat the person that surfed 2 hours ago who had these two as their high scores and try and get myself into this leaderboard conversation. It does keep that element of like engagement, not just from us as an audience caring about it, but also from those surfers in that moment. I could imagine being in that situation, being a little bit more like fiery. I mean, you could see throughout each of the heats, like in the Katie Gabby semifinal and the Katie Molly final, when you're kind of taking a look at the surfer in the water who's caught a wave and then back at the little stand, whatever, on the deck where the other surfers are sitting, like the amount of times it went to Katie's face of her like being so pumped because she's like supporting the women that she's surfing against, like really pumped on Gabby's power and those kind of things. And then also just like, you know, looking really tense or like kind of like funny looks on her face because she's also going, oh my gosh, okay, Molly's just gotten that wave. That's going to make it better. That's going to make it harder for me to come back on my next round and that sort of thing. Like that's the kind of pressure that we want to see in the moment, which is also going to force surfers to really step up and take ownership in those moments put everything on the line. If they fall, they fall. At least they went as hard as they possibly could. And I feel like that built into that anticipation, everything, which is really awesome.
Yeah, and I think too, to circle it back to a point that you said before in terms of being with your class that helps push you forward as a generation. We were actually getting to see glimpses of that in Heat by Heat as like they're keeping the camera on the face of the women that are standing there watching. Okay, this is what that surfer, this is how they just read that wave. And this is now what I'm like mentally preparing. Okay, well, if I improve upon right there or do this differently, or for Katie, if I'm able to execute this roundhouse, I know that's going to, that's going to come back and reward her accordingly. I think being able to get that vision in that right up and close in their minds, because of course, in a normal standard heat, those are emotions that they're processing either as they're paddling back out or dealing with priority and all of that type of strategy. But we're not up and close in it, obviously, as a spectator.
It's so true. And I guess I'll take this conversation now into like, let's dissect the Katie Molly final. But before we get into that, even just that fact that like, okay, my overall thoughts actually on this event was super uninteresting. Really didn't care about it. Only watched it on the condensed heat replays, partly because it ran through the middle of the night. But I stand alongside of the whole conversation within the surfing world, during that week post that event. So many articles that were written about it. Some pretty sharp stuff said on SwellNet. Just some good coverage and really like no curtains, like nothing holding back the real kind of thoughts of the surf community around not being interested in a wave pool.
Yeah.
Like, let's just go back to ocean surfing.
Yeah.
Most of that comes from the fact that we're missing out on those in between. Like, we want to see the strategy unfold within heat surfing. That's what then takes us to the really exciting elements of, is a wave going to come in time? So-and-so needs this. It's not that they're going to have a perfect wave right in front of them to see if they can surf to it. It's going to be like, well, is a wave going to come? Is that wave going to have potential? In the midst of that wave maybe having that potential, then is that surfer going to be able to rise to the occasion and perform knowing that this is probably their last chance? Or maybe there's enough time on the clock that they could get in a second wave. Like any of those kind of things, those priority calls, like the paddle battles, everything that wraps into it. That's what we want to see. That's what we love about surfing. We'll get into this conversation deeper as well when it comes to natural selection. But it was really when it comes to this month's conversation, I'm actually have very similar feelings between the two. Like, cool, they got great waves at the wave pool. Like, I would love to be surfing that right now. Like, absolutely. And I appreciate the surfing that we got to see, which is why we're going to talk so much about like some of those moments, or we already have. Same with natural selection. Like, I appreciate those highlight moments that came out of it. But the fact that we've missed all of the ins and outs of actual competitive surfing within it, that I think, at least for you and I, Rachel, that's what makes us hungry for it. Yeah. The kind of resounding conversation in the surf world is also that that's what they're hungry for. And I feel like both of these events between Abu Dhabi and natural selection have missed out on very key elements of what competitive surfing is all about.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm just going to think out loud here and process this out loud. But, I think almost for the core surf audience and the wider surf audience, I know for me, I love watching a heat in its entirety in terms of everything that made up the person become the winner. And like you just had articulated, that is a combination of the surfing, of the heat play, of the priority. I love the chess game. And as a competitor myself, that's what keeps me coming back to competition, is I love the pressure of the chess game, or I love attempting to execute a really well put together heat in everything, in reading the waves, in selecting the right waves, all of that. And I think as spectators of sport, we all love those like down to the wire, will they perform moments, whether it's in football, whether it's in soccer, whatever. That's across sport. That's what spectators love to see. And I think that's what a timed heat and all of its aspects creates that feeling. I think to really appreciate a wave pool competition, you actually have to be I don't know. And again, I'm thinking out loud, but I'm going to pose this to you and see what you think, and we'll find where we end up landing. But you have to be the super, super core surfer that really just loves watching like fundamentally good surfing and seeing how they go. Because for the like spectator that's not that like is kind of somewhat interested and just likes watching it for the entertainment, it becomes boring and repetitive because they're not looking at all the little differences. Like, oh, Katie chose to do a roundhouse there or whatever. Like, it's all starts to really blend in. So you have to be the really detailed core surfer to maybe find some form of appreciation out of it, who's not just looking at it for the entirety of what the competition could be in terms of adding in all those other elements of excitement. Or, however, I know a lot of our core surfers do not like it. So I don't know. I'm thinking out loud in terms of just, could that be like, who is the audience that like, do you know what I'm saying?
It's a really good question.
I'm finding, I wish I spent more time thinking about this, but yeah.
I think I'm tracking with you. I'm thinking about it in terms of like, I sometimes, and there, maybe it's like, depends, it's condition dependent, right? Conditions are not that great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go on and I'm probably going to watch condensed heat replay because I don't want to spend, unless I'm just like, I don't know, cooking and I'm just doing something where you can have like background. It's on the background. I can listen to the commentators when they're cueing us in that someone's like paddling and actually looking at a wave, and I can pay attention. The rest of it, I'm like, maybe not going to be that stoked on. If it's like a really epic day, I'm going to watch and be like more keen to like pop it on the TV, sit down on the couch, like actually sit and watch.
Yeah.
Through the whole thing.
For sure.
Listen to all the conversations, listen to the guests they have on, like just be engaged with the whole vibe. So I think for a lot of a feeling was probably that it's like conditions dependent like that for a lot of people, right? And we know that because we know the viewership numbers jump greatly when the conditions are actually good. When it comes to having like something like Abu Dhabi, where the wind is changing and that's your only conditions change, something like natural selection, which we're going to get into deeper, and I'm bringing it a little bit early into our conversation, but who cares? Where they are just playing the actual waves and they're skipping everything else. So we've got an hour heat and it's going to take us, I don't know, 8 to 15 minutes to watch the whole heat, maybe shorter even, because we're just going to be picking up on the waves and we're missing all those in-between things. It's like we're missing out on so much of what the game is actually about, like in basketball, there is, or say baseball even, right? Baseball and surfing are probably the better comparison to the format that we watch it in. We are watching 8 hours of competition for surfing in a day. That's a long day. You're committed to it. You're going to a baseball field to watch a game. You are committed to eating a handful of hot dogs. You're sitting in the seat for a very long time. If you're out of there in 3 hours, that's like a miracle. If you're out of there in 6 hours and it's like way late at night and you thought you're going to be home at 10 and you're driving home at 12 because the game just continued going on and on and on with innings and whatever and extras and all the things, like that's more the vibe, right? Now imagine like for the core fans in baseball, if they're watching a condensed version on ESPN and it's literally just the hits, it's like, oh, well, this guy, okay, he hit and he ran the bases and he got like a score on the board. You're missing out on all of the in-between moments and like all of the like strategic plays or maybe like the saves and like you're just missing out on the entire game. And I feel like for surfing, I don't know, sometimes I'm a huge fan of watching it in a format like that where it's just like short and sharp and I just want to like, okay, I just want to see some highlights. Let's like get through that and I don't care about the rest. Especially if the scores were pretty like average throughout that whole round or something. But for the most part, in order to have that context, like you got to be able to see everything play out in between. Yeah. Even if it means sitting there for 8 hours.
Well, speaking of, and this is a thought that I had before, and I'll loop this now back into, we'll take this conversation into the actual final that we saw, is I think the format that we had is better than the leaderboard because, like you did just mention, the only thing that is creating change or of conditions is the wind. However, it does get really windy over there and it does make a difference on the wave. So in terms of that leaderboard format versus the head-to-head, at least in the head-to-head, you are surfing more similar conditions. Like you could see it was a little bit more chandelier-y
like even
during
matched.
that end of the day final between Katie and Molly. And at least they're surfing both those similar conditions, rather than someone who's getting an offshore day like an offshore morning that's really hollowing out the right, let's say, and making that really easy to like sit longer and deeper versus an end of the day where it's chandeliering more. So I do think that's another reason why I liked this format. And I thought we saw that just play out, or like the final was a good example of those types of conditions.
It's so true. And I mean, talking about the intensity and the drama that came with that final, it was pretty similar from a dramatic perspective to their pipe semifinal, where you just like, both surfers are on, they're pushing each other, they're pushing their level of progression, and that's what's allowing us to be really invested and really engaged. You can see that their emotions are involved in it. And that's really what we want to see, especially when it comes to like the finals of an event like this.
Absolutely. And I'm going to loop back to what we were talking about before in terms of veterans maybe being a little bit more stunted. I think you can see Katie and Molly's emotions are so invested in it. And they're at a point in their career where they're not just invested in getting a result or a first place, but they're invested in really progressing and pushing their own surfing. And I do think there is a level that you can reach at a point where you're kind of like, I'm really happy with my surfing and like, I'm not actively looking for ways to progress or push. Like that's a conscious choice. And it's so easy to sit on an autopilot. And I've experienced that in my own surfing. And that's why I'm speaking to that, is like, it's easy to get to a point where you're like, well, my surfing's getting me quarterfinals, semifinals. So like, I'm cruising, I'm going to stay at this autopilot, versus actually switching into that conscious, I am hungry to just be the best surfer that I literally have the potential to be. And I'm going to feed off the energy of the other people that I'm surfing with to do that. And I think Molly and Katie have a really awesome, healthy, cool dynamic in that. And we could watch that firsthand. And that's what I think was the cool part about this final. And of course, in their semifinal at Pipe, is they feed off each other so well in the best, most healthy way that makes them both stand out and be incredible surfers.
It's so true. And I think even like, I've got a couple of thoughts, but first thought was that, so it was Molly up first within like the final back and forth. Like she had her two waves first, a right and a left, and then Katie back and forth like that. Molly's first right. Not exciting to me. Like sharp, good surfing, all the things, zero emotion in it, and a 100% holding back. And that came across so evidently because we had watched the girls through the semifinals, like really heavily push themselves. They had like, they were so clearly putting everything on the line, like pushing the fins out of every turn, trying to add more power, trying to get deeper in the barrel, like putting so much risk into it. And to me, Molly, I think she had like a 7 as her first right. The evidence in that score for me was that she was lacking that aggression, that real intentionality, and that like risk within her surfing. Katie then, and then I can't remember what Molly did on her first left, but like whatever it was, that was I was like, Katie, well, like, Molly hasn't shown up to this final. That's right. Okay. So my full impression was like, Molly hasn't shown up to the final. Katie's got this in the bag 100%. Like too clean and clear between like semifinal Katie and Molly's first wave, and like even just her body language within that. Then Katie came out on her first run and surfed, like brought the exact opposite energy into everything, surfed her absolute heart out, put all of the risk on the line, like incredibly, incredibly good surfing, creative, so much flow, which so many of the surfers in wave pools lack flow. And maybe they lack flow in a lot of their surfing anyways. And it's like it's put underneath a microscope, a magnifying glass.
Shannon throwing shots.
So to me, for Katie, that's like the opposite. I'm like, it's just too good. And then after that, the back and forth for Molly's second run was a complete attitude change. Like she came into that so fired up. Her body language spoke to it. Her surfing spoke to it. And it got her right back in the running to very likely take away the win prior to Katie's final run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that point, like obviously we saw, like you said, Molly pushing her boundaries in the semifinals. And so I would attest so much of that description of seeing her on her first run to nerves, because it is so much harder to be the person going first. I think you're just versus the person going second. Like if the person going first fell, like, okay, all I have to do is kind of be a little bit better than that. And you end up being a lot better than that because you were able to unlock that tension from your mind.
Yeah.
Where I think just going up first, you have that, you tense up, and that wave is obviously shows, I think, your tension when you're holding that. So I think that's where a lot of that showed versus then her second run. She was able to release a lot of that stress, or because she had nothing to lose at that point, like she was going to lose. And we got to see her step into that next little bit.
Yeah, to really have to like step in, raise the level, which then forced Katie also to raise the level. And by the end of it, it was just so tight between the two of them. I think Katie needed to up her heat total by 0.03 on her final two waves in order to take the win. So it was like that tight between the two of them, which was really exciting. That said, when it comes to kind of statistics of the two of them, Katie somehow still has a 6-0 lead in head-to-head matchups between her and Molly on the championship tour, and 2-0
crazy
on the Challenger Series.
Seriously,
Molly has
crazy.
yet to defeat her.
Yeah, those are amazing stats, and 1000% something that would, like, Molly would know those stats, and that is hard going up in against that. I think fortunately for us and fortunately for them, a lot of those battles, they seem to be on mostly opposite sides of the draw because of how far up in the rankings they are. So those head-to-head matchups are either happening in semifinals or finals. In terms of Katie, that is her second finals now in a row. So that's 2 for 2, a first place and a second place. She has a really great start to the season.
Yeah, I mean, for Katie, this now sets her up with a huge lead on the rest of the field heading into Portugal. She's also had a victory in Portugal. It was the first CT victory back in 2023, so that's going to feel really great for her, getting her feet back in the sand there. And that's going to be massive for her campaign towards winning a back-to-back world title in this season. Now, on the opposite side to that, for Molly has, in the last couple seasons, she's won the second event of the season the last 2 years in a row, which is amazing. She often starts the season super strong, like, coming out with a victory, coming out with really exceptional surfing, but then struggles to maintain that consistency. It's going to be really interesting this year to see how she juggles that, if she's able to find something different to tap into to find consistency throughout an entire season and continue to be really one of those that's going to butt heads with Katie and push for a world title against Katie throughout the entire season, especially considering that she is no longer working with her longtime coach in Glenn Microhall.
Yeah, well, I am looking forward to seeing where Molly does take this season. It looks like she has made a lot of changes, but it looks like she's having a lot of fun. I mean, everything that we saw from her, whether it was on the broadcast or through her socials or whatever, she really looks to be enjoying herself. And, go that back and forth with Katie and just even their interactions is really nice to see. And, I'd say to those stats where you say 2 years in a row she's won the second event. Well, she's pretty close. She got second in the second event. So she is really good at keeping that, she's had a strong start is, what I am getting at. And looking forward to, I think, seeing how maybe these changes will potentially change that dynamic that you had talked towards for the rest of this year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes from her. I think it's going to be really good, and I'm just curious to see, who's going to be those surfers in the pack that can consistently be putting pressure on Katie throughout this season. So Molly has every potential to continue doing that. Maybe this kind of newfound Molly that's a little bit more relaxed, having some more fun while she's on tour as well, could bring that out of her. Another surfer, though, who was an absolute standout rage during, Abu Dhabi, specifically on her power, is Gabriella Bryan. And she is a surfer that I think could absolutely take Katie to a world title this year. Or like in that fight, she could be part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Her power was nearly unmatched out there. And she had won all the great reads of the wave, but her and Katie was a really interesting semifinal to watch because their approaches were very different. And I think Katie had speed and zestiness where Gabby had a lot of power to her surfing. And obviously it was Katie who ended up reigning supreme out of that heat, but not to say that Gabby's was not really, really great to watch. And I think, like you said, is kind of, it takes that type of surfing and something different, staying true to her style of surfing that actually puts that pressure on. And you could see Katie in between those heats when they were looking at her, she was feeling that pressure and she was reacting, having those live reactions, which was great to see.
It's so true. And like bar, I think one fall from Gabby could have taken out the win and been into the final. Like she would have beat Katie. So it was really, really that close between scores, between what they were doing. Of course, in that heat, that's when Katie was able to finally successfully pull out that big opening roundhouse cutback, which then just she was able to connect with like absolutely flawless flow, style, power, all of the things that we wanted to see. Extremely deep barrel riding from Katie as well, which she just continued to push herself deeper and deeper. And just like connect an entire wave together. And that's where we saw some of those really huge scores starting to come through. But Gabby with her power was also right there in dropping some very big numbers.
Well, and to that point where you say that was finally that heat where Katie was able to land that roundhouse, sometimes out of necessity in order to advance is when you actually see the surfers get the deepest barrels or the biggest turns because they're putting themselves under pressure. And that as an athlete, it's like that convergence of that pressure to perform and then that execution. And I think that shows that that's the pressure that Gabby was putting on Katie, where she was like, all right, it's go time. This is now or never. And we're going for this. And we have to land this if we're going to be advancing out of this heat. And so I think that's the perfect example of that's the pressure Gabby was putting on her.
Yeah, she was absolutely doing that. And she was doing that pretty much with pure power. Like her barrel riding is there in some instances and then not there. She's got great technique, but she kind of struggles. We've noticed this at Pipe with her after like a couple seasons on now, the same conversation coming out of like, if we were to dissect Gabby's barrel riding, where she's got good technique, but just her trust of herself, her gut instinct in those moments of reading a wave and putting herself in the right position. It was a little bit like that here at Surf Abu Dhabi as well, where she was then kind of more muscling herself around some of those sections where the rest of the girls were really focused on getting tight, deep barrels in order to showcase that power. And it worked for her to the extent of getting her into the semifinals. From there, we then saw that she was in the back half of her two waves in that semifinal, then starting to really try and push her barrel game as well, which was really good. But I think for Gabby, that's one of the exciting things is like, she knows where her strengths lie. She's absolutely picking up the baton from Carissa Moore when it comes to being well-rounded, but having an insane amount of power on tap in comparison to the rest of the field. Part of that goes with the fact that this girl has she has serious muscles. She's got strength to her that is just different from what you're going to see. I mean, the comparison between her and a Erin Brooks is like wildly different, but even between her and Molly, and Molly's a, you know, like that strong kind of lean build, the power that Gabby has with her naturally, like a Carissa, is just so different from that conversation. So I think for her, it's going to be really exciting to see how she goes with more of her feeling like she's at this place on tour now where she's becoming established. She's becoming a real threat. She's going to start surfing other waves now that she also knows, because she's been on tour for a while and she's been able to experience some of these other breaks coming up in the next few months, and seeing how much she can continue to push that. And it's like, for her, she's redefining women's progression on the face of the wave, not progression when the general idea of progression comes to being like above the lip line, right? Like into the airs, but actually when it comes to power and progression, she's doing that. And it's kind of similar to what we've seen Ethan Ewing doing for the men, where he's just consistently sticking to that. Like, he knows his rail game and his power game is so good, it's so flawless, that he's going to continue doing that until it takes him maybe to a world title, rather than like forcing all of these other things into his surfing. And I feel like Gabby has that opportunity to do the same thing.
Well, moving into a couple of other noteworthy highlights from the event, we did see all three rookies make the quarterfinals, being Vahine Fierro, Bella Kenworthy, and Erin Brooks. Vahine Fierro, I think out of those three, even more so being that standout, advancing through those night sessions and just proving that she has that really strong range to her surfing. Obviously, we always think of her as the Tahiti specialist, you know, but this style of surfing, and back to that conversation that we were talking about before, and why maybe the core chorus of surfers would maybe find this event interesting, is because it's all just about looking at the technical side of these surfers surfing and seeing, you know, you're looking at really minute differences in between their surfing, but it really puts that on range and puts that on stage, I guess, and shows where your flaws are and where your strengths are. And I think that's where Vahine really stepped up. In where we expect her to be X, she was able to really prove that she has a strong Y as well.
Yeah, I thought that was really exciting to be able to see within her surfing as well. I'm just frothing that she even made it through, like got that quarterfinal finish, has found herself along with Bella, along with Erin in those final state conversations at the kind of the wave of the future, you know? Like, they're surfing the wave of the future. They are the wave of the future. They're stepping up and they're really proving themselves up against that veteran pack, which was pretty outstanding. The last thing that I want to note about this entire event was how fun it's been to then post-event watch Habibi TV, which is something that the WSL has put out with Stace Galbraith. And like, anytime they've got Stace on, whether it's on the broadcast or at G-Land, they had him just like mic'd up going through the event, getting some behind the scenes footage and stuff. You know that you're going to learn some gold about the surfers. He knows so many of them like really well personally. And he is just that personality to like kind of, you know, throw any conversation out. Some really funny stuff from that. I highly recommend. Basically, my takeaway from an event like this is like, I'm going to watch it in condensed heat version. And I'm going to watch something like Habibi TV to get all of the fun behind the scenes that I will miss out maybe on watching the entirety of a broadcast for the sake of time. And yeah, the main things that we learned out of that, or one thing that we learned about Vahine, she got 4 speeding tickets while in Abu Dhabi within like the first 48 hours of being there. And had racked up $1,000 in fines within, I think, literally like 48 hours. Oh no. Which is so intense. Good thing she made quarters, because she's got some money behind her now. And she has also never had.
She made semis, actually.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah. Into the semis. So yeah, even more money to pay off those fines with. And she's never had a sip of alcohol in her life, which is the same as me. And I have not met many people like that in my life. So I thought that that was pretty great.
Well, I love that we're learning, you know, we learned a lot about her in the conversation we were able to have with her at the end of last year, Shan, in that interview. But that's even more. So I love learning all the colors of her and the surfers through those fun outlets. It reminds me of when Peter King used to travel on tour, you know, and have the tour notes and stuff. We got so much fun content about the surfers from that. And that was like somewhat even more interesting than the contest a lot of times. And I think that lends to this too, is like there are some fun takeaways from this. I think as a whole, we have talked quite positively about this event, Shan, but it's more so just talk. I think in that, in my opinion, there are performances that I'm holding quite high and talking about positively, but looking at the event as a whole in the wave pool, I find it not not the most positive addition on tour, you know. But to talk about some of these performances has been great, and then to see the offshoots of content like that has is the fun, entertaining stuff, to be honest.
So good. Well, yeah, I think basically we can sum it up by saying we're not hanging on the edge of our seats waiting for this event for next year to run. Like, we're just like, okay, it's done. Sweet. Awesome. Let's not think about it again. But getting to see some of the nuances within the surfing, getting to also reflect on the fact when it came between men's and women's surfing, the women's surfing, what we were seeing those girls pull out from a Gabby, a Katie, a Molly, that's the best surfing that we saw in the entire event, like across the fields. And that's the conversation that's been happening in the surfing world since then, is like, once again, the women have risen to the top. They are the shining stars out of this entire thing. And I think that is so, so awesome to see.
Well, moving forward in our conversation of competitions, Shan, we're sticking to our theme of more alternative competitions for this month, being wave pool and now natural selection. Obviously, natural selection is something that we've alluded to before, and a lot of our listeners, I think, are across it. It was pretty exciting that it came into surf for the first time. We have seen it before it's a different alternative type of competition format that we've seen take place in snow, bike, mountain, etc. But the first time we've seen it in snow. So we saw 4 women invited into that, and that took place as a competition down in Micronesia.
Yeah, it's so good. It was exciting to see this kind of conversation coming around, like first time to be able to see natural selection taking place in surf. And the whole vibe behind natural selection is putting athletes of, you know, whatever it is, snowboarding, skiing, etc., into the absolute like harshest but best of environments for them to then rise to the occasion. So it is that idea of like, who is going to survive the natural selection? Who's going to actually like uphold and make it through, you know, the backcountry in these crazy conditions, or like whatever the deal is. So the idea to throw this pack of surfers, 8 men, 4 women, into the middle of Micronesia, very remote, far away from everything, like it is for that anticipation, that excitement level of putting them into nature. And it's really like wrestling with nature and who's going to come out on top, surfing a wave that was kind of like, it was described a little bit like Tehupo, like chopes, with a combination of Kira, where it was like heavy and crazy and super shallow barrels, but also just ran for ages. And you could end up getting some really long locked in rides. So that's what we were really hopeful to see when it came to from a conditions perspective. Unfortunately, they also got hammered by trade winds for like the, you know, entirety of what we saw throughout their 3-week. I think they had a 3-week waiting period, which is pretty amazing. I mean, most contests, like a 10-day waiting period is pretty good. Maybe you get up to 14 sometimes. But to have 3 weeks to pick out the best of the conditions, there's like some huge highlight moments like Mila Coco Brown, which we'll get into, with some really incredible waves. But there was also a lot of that challenge and that like raw element that natural section's kind of looking for. But I think that even within that, we were kind of hoping for it to be like just a little more consistent in the good factor alongside of that wild natural selection element to things. But having said all that, Mila Coco Brown stepped up and ended up taking out the win for the entire event.
She did. And I think she was the standout throughout both heats that she surfed in. So that felt like that sat well with the vibe, which that's actually how the judges were scoring. There's no scores written down or anything. It's just 3. We had 3 judges there. Pam Burridge, actually, who we've had on the podcast before, being one of the judges on that panel, and they just sit there and watch the heat. And at the end of the heat, they discuss and say, who do you think took that away? And I think in that scoring type, that does allow, they did have like the things that they're looking for in terms of like commitment, and they had 5 things that we saw come up on the broadcast in the things that they were considering. But it was basically, who's that person that's really standing out? And I think it's safe to say there's multiple elements that do play into like, who is the person that we thought was walked away better? And that's the person that's not just, while they are having to look at who got the better waves, it doesn't mean that influence isn't being had about who is going and sitting deeper, who's kind of throwing themselves under the lip harder, who is really throwing themselves out there. And the standouts were Mila and Kira, absolutely, going into the final. And then we saw the final be a little bit smaller, and so it was more head to head. But I thought that day one was really exciting. And what we saw, I think it was even interesting out of that first heat, and I know we're about to get into it, but to hear the women's takeaway as like their offhanded comments. Everyone was kind of throwing it. They were saying like, wow, there's so much respect for Kira and what she was paddling into. And as a spectator and for the judges, it looked like Mila really ran away with that as well for some of the deeper barrels that she had. But Kira was definitely the standout in the size of waves that she was taking off on, and the position, the place in the lineup, and the waves that she was putting herself in. So, I just thought that element of it was really entertaining.
Yeah, it's so true. Like thinking through, so the reason Mila got the win in her first heat is because she found a wave where she got a double barrel, and everyone else was looking for that. Kira was like on the hunt. So from a hunger perspective, from that first heat, Kira was right there, and it had the commentary panel, the commentators, Barton Lynch, Lisa Anderson, and Tanner Gadauskas, kind of all like, well, maybe this could go in Kira's favor because of that kind of different element to the way the judges were actually judging things, and it being more of like a feeling rather than like putting down numbers and then going, all right, what's the average of the best 2 at the end of the heat? And so it was really, I felt in watching that first heat, like Mila's got to have it because that wave was so good. It was like so much commitment.
Yeah.
She was able to get, you could then see the heaviness of the wave. You could see actually why they're running an event in a wave like this, like why this is the spot that they chose. Because she really got those, couple good barrels. She had some good sections for turns within those heats as well, which was really exciting. But I think for that element, I was like very happy with the way the judging and the decision making went for that first heat for Mila to take that advancing position through, like absolutely kind of shown through with that specific wave. But Kira was right there within it. And that was really interesting to see kind of unravel in that first heat where Annie and Coco were there. Like Coco was looking really stylish. There were some moments for both Annie and for Coco, but they just didn't quite get a wave that was going to like allow them to get any kind of solid scores. And so that really set up Mila to be able to take away that leading position. That then advanced her straight into the final. And we'll break down a little bit more when it comes to the format and everything. But out of that first heat, then we saw the bottom 3 women get a resurf essentially in a second heat in round 2. And the best of that heat was going to then meet Mila Brown in the final.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Mila's surfing. I was really impressed with Kira's surfing. I would have loved to see more from Annie and Coco. Obviously, those day ones. So to paint the picture for any listeners who haven't sat down and watched it, and I will say I wouldn't blame you because it is a pretty hefty viewing experience. It's 2 separate YouTube videos. The men's and the women's surfing is combined into one, and they're both 3 hours long. I did find myself like, even though it's a condensed version of the 1 hour heats, like we're probably actually only watching 20 minutes of that. Like it is condensed out of that hour. I still was like fast forwarding through bits and stuff to try and make it go more speedy so I could see the action. So if you haven't watched it, day one was the bigger day. That's where we saw a lot of those standout barrels come out of. And we saw a lot of that messy, really strong wind on it as well, which I think made it for a more interesting viewing experience as compared to finals day, a little bit cleaner, but a little bit smaller. So I really loved that day one was that opportunity that we got to see the surfers throw themselves into and get really beat up. We saw Annie throw herself as a goofy footer. It was a lot more difficult. We saw Tanner was someone who was able to speak to that quite a bit in the commentary, and just in those tight, fast barrels, trying to take off and navigate that was a little bit tougher than, let's say, Kira, the other three women had.
Yeah, well,
Coco
as a
just
goofy
couldn't
foot, right?
quite, yeah.
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 Yeah. For the goofy foots, and the same was happening on the men's side, like for Calibas. As a goofy foot, it was just such an impossible wave to actually surf.
Yeah. And then we just saw Coco not really get into rhythm on that day one. And it was Kira and Milla who really ran away with that. And I found their surfing really fun to watch. And Milla, at the end of her first session, I think I really liked her takeaway. That her takeaway was, she said something to the effect of, yeah, it's really tricky out there and really difficult, but it really challenged our ocean knowledge and our ability to read that. And I think she's the one who stood out and above that. She was the one who was able to find those diamonds in the rough. And it was a lot of rough.
Yeah, it was a lot of rough. That's like a really good way to put it, because it really tested that ocean knowledge. It tested the ability, or even just the guts of these surfers to put themselves in positions where it was like,
guts.
I think, yeah, like that last wave actually made it through that section, and I could for sure put myself in that position. So I'm going to push myself farther up the reef to try and get a little bit deeper, or being like, I don't know if that's makeable. So sitting a little bit farther down the reef allows you to get maybe a longer wave towards the end section of it. And so there had to be a lot of decision making on the fly happening for these surfers, which I think is also a lot of the point of natural selection, right? It's putting them into a position that's it's challenging because it's not a place that they've all gone surfing before. Like, this is throwing them into the elements, and they're having to just trust their own instinct and trust their gut really on what they're doing. So that was really interesting. And those first and second round heats both ran in that day one. So they got the bigger, kind of heavier conditions of it, where then the final rounds, and on the men's side, it was like semifinals, I think, ran on the second day where the conditions had tapered off quite a lot. So it was good to see the women get 2 opportunities to surf in heavier conditions. In that second round, it went from being 4 surfers just down to 3. So it was, whoever hadn't made it. Milla had made it through to the final. The bottom 3 surfers between Kira, Annie, and Coco were then surfing up against each other again in kind of like a sudden death. Whoever takes the win gets into the final round. Kira came into that heat, Rach, looking so hungry. She literally, at the start of the heat, the commentators pulled it up so quickly, and it was great. They called out because it was this drone shot and we were kind of far away, and you're trying to make out the lineup suddenly. And then they were like, oh my gosh, look at where Kira's sitting in comparison to both Coco and Annie. And it was like she was surfing a completely different wave from where they were. She'd put herself so far up the point. It was like awesome to see that she just came out with that amount of hunger, that tenacity within her to put herself in position. And within the first few minutes, she had multiple waves under her belt. The waves that were nowhere near anything that Annie or Coco could have even caught. There weren't waves breaking where they were sitting. So she started at that heat so strong, and that took her through to a pretty easy run towards victory to make it into the final.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Kira and her ocean knowledge and her guts and where she was positioning herself. She stood out to me a lot in that way. And so on another separate video is where you do see the final then package on the YouTube Natural Selection Surf. And that's then where we got to watch Kira and Milla compete against each other in that final. And this one I thought was really head to head. I found it I wish they were still in the conditions from the day before. I wish we got to see Milla in more of the conditions from the day before. I was disappointed in watching, like, I was like, okay, great. We get to see Kira and Milla, these two standouts that were really putting themselves in these just testy and, sorry, these like, what word am I looking for? Just these like testy positions on the wave. To see that finals day had backed off a little bit, obviously to no one's control. It's just how it was, but it did turn the contest into more of a turns competition. And that's where I actually, when it was turns, I thought Kira was winning it. I thought she had so much power to her surfing. I really loved the fundamentals and the flow that she had to her surfing. And it wasn't until Milla was actually able to find that one barrel that I think tipped her over the other way. And that's what Kira needed to find in order to give that the judges kind of that resounding feeling. And obviously that's what they're judging off of, that resounding feeling that I think we all walked away with, like, well, Milla got a wave with awesome turns right at the beginning and that barrel wave. And so you leave like, okay, she was able to find and put the whole package out there together.
Yeah, that's totally it. Like, I had the same feeling. The commentators had the same feeling, kind of like, oh, Kira's maybe got this. Like, she had a wave that had some more significant back-to-back-to-back turns with a good end section. Where Milla had one wave that was like a really good end section on it with like decent surfing on her way to that. But you were kind of, if you're only weighing up those two, okay, Kira's got the nod because her wave had more to it, right? And then by the time Milla finally found herself a barrel, you could see that Kira was like hungry and wanted to find something like that. And she just couldn't find a wave that way. And I appreciate the way that the final kind of unraveled with Milla taking out the win in that scenario, because she was looking so comfortable in those conditions. Like, she's as a 17-year-old, she is a crazy, well-rounded surfer. She's surfing so far above her age and what we should be expecting of her. She'll be on the championship tour in no time when it comes to that side of competitive surfing. For her to have then found a barrel and to be rewarded on the type of scale and scoring that they were doing, the judging process of being like, okay, she's kind of tapped together. She had that momentum at the start. She's finished with that momentum. Where Kira had that kind of flare through the middle part of the heat and then just wasn't able to actually back it up with a substantial wave. And I think for me, I then respect the way the judging turned out because, and we can maybe even turn this into some of the things that we feel like natural selection got right, is that it can be really challenging to, without actually putting down scores on a piece of paper, you're watching an hour-long heat. That's a really long time to be paying sharp attention, to be watching every wave, and to actually remember what happened. I will watch a 20-minute heat and I'll forget the first two waves in comparison to the last two waves in an instant. So for them to have to kind of keep that in mind the whole time, they weren't like supposed to be writing down numbers or anything like that. For them to have gotten it right in the end of being like, okay, remember back to the fact that Milla had that good wave. Now reflecting on the fact that she actually found a barrel out there, she found the best of the elements that were out and on offer that day.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It was satisfying, I think, too, to feel that they got that right, especially when it is overall vibe. I think that sometimes where it can be frustrating from a WSL contest perspective is sometimes the person who you think just surfed better heat and overall surfed better doesn't win, because when it comes down to the numbers, you know, the other person actually had two slightly better numbers, or the way the math works out, which I know doesn't necessarily always make sense, but sometimes you walk away with that like resounding feeling of like, gosh, that person surfed a better overall heat. And so it was nice to actually have that rewarded as a spectator. You're like, wow, I actually think that person surfed the better heat. And so therefore they're just rewarded with that. And so taking this conversation into what we think they got right, Shan, in terms of the overall natural selection format for the first time they're having this in surf, I did appreciate that they were trying something fresh in that and bringing some freshness into surfing in that way. You know, we've seen formats like that similar in the past, the Billabong Challenge or the OP Pro boat trip that happened in the early 2000s. It's been a long time, or even we saw that kind of with Stab, Stab Surf 100 take place over the past couple of years. But it was really nice. I think every time something like that happens, the surfing world is really like excited and happy about it. So it was nice to have another form of that introduced.
Yeah, it's always great because we get so frustrated with like basically the idea that the WSL is, kind of believes that they're doing everything perfect, right? Like they've got the thing and no one else can touch what they're doing with competitive surfing. The moment someone else steps up and throws in their hand up and wants to throw in some kind of variety to that, like the whole surfing world gets on board and we're all really excited to see it. So the fact that they were attempting something new is like really awesome. And like you said, yeah, we've seen that in the past as well across a few different things. Also, the idea that they're hunting out quality waves, that's always going to be the biggest draw. I mean, that's the biggest draw in any competition, right? The highest viewership comes when, like we've already talked about in this episode, when the waves are good. When you throw in good waves that are actually waves of consequence, that's even more interesting as an audience member. That's amazing for the actual surfers themselves, knowing that they're getting to push themselves in good quality surf. So the idea behind that of taking them to Micronesia, finding a wave that's hectic as ever, putting the surfers into that, like those are huge draw cards. I love the fact that they put that into it. Even though we didn't get to see it like necessarily all the time or anything, it was just the idea they were doing that was like a very interesting aspect to it. And then the kind of one other thing I think they did really well was having the involvement of former female world champions, which it really lacks in the commentary and the judging panels of basically anything the WSL does. Where are the female world champions within that conversation? They're not invited. So to have Pam Burridge, to have Lisa Anderson in the conversation, Pam being on the judges panel, so she was on the ground or in the ocean on the boat in Micronesia for the whole event was really sick. And then to see Lisa Anderson and get to hear some of her thoughts and comments through the broadcast was really awesome as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's something that we miss more of. So it was nice that in their first ever entrance into surfing, that was something they absolutely got right by including both of those women.
Yeah, they obviously were putting their value into that, which is amazing. One thing I am curious to know, and we'll have to see if we can find this out from Pam, is her thoughts on the final package overall, because I know that one of the things she's raised with us in the past that she struggles with is missing the first part of a heat in a WSL broadcast where the commercial break is running and then it comes back into a heat and we're even a minute into it, 30 seconds into the heat, maybe 2 minutes sometimes. And you've missed that opening moment of seeing positioning, of seeing the strategy unfold. And that is one of the things, I guess I can just lead us straight into the conversation. We've just tapped on some of those elements that we think they got right within natural selection. Now to tap into some of those things that they got wrong is the fact that we missed everything except for the actual waves being ridden for the entirety of this contest format.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, the format itself is different too. It's not priority. It's not as much that, I don't know, chess game that we're talking about. And it is a 60-minute heat. So it's like less that time crunch pressure in the heat as well. So I understand why they packaged it up in the way that they did, of course, like, for the viewing point, but it did make it, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is there because I also am not going to sit down and watch a whole 60-minute heat, but I did kind of feel like, okay, we were left with some elements that felt like it was missing.
Yeah, that's true because I also like when my literal first impression of the first few minutes was like, oh, right. I'm just watching wave after wave. Like in 3 minutes, I've just seen 5 waves ridden or whatever, more than that even.
Yeah.
And this is awesome because I'm not going to have to sit here for an entire hour to watch a single heat, let alone 2 hours to watch the second heat and that, so on for an entire day. But then the fact that we were missing out on like all of the nuances of the in-between moments of any positioning in the lineup, of, even listening to the commentators be able to like bring in some conversation and some thoughts. Like so much of the So much of surfing and professional surfing when it comes to a broadcast perspective is listening into what some of those world champs have to say. So one of my favorite parts about being a commentator, sitting in that host role, the way that Ed was for natural selection, who's just kind of guiding the conversation, throwing out questions, pointing things where it needs to go, keeping the focus on whatever's happening on the screen. The best part about it is when I get to sit next to someone like Barton Lynch and I get to hear him start dissecting. If he was in this situation or in this situation before in his life, or Rach, when I'm sitting next to you in the booth, like getting to hear you really go through a complete thought on something because you watched it in this wave, you got to see the way the surfer rode it, like whatever it is, that to me is so interesting. And when I'm watching and listening, like I'll sometimes watch a heat because of who the guest is in there, not because they're doing a live interview on that guest, but because I want to know that guest's thoughts on these surfers in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And what we missed from this, unfortunately, was the fact that we had Barton and Lisa in there, but they weren't, because it was like wave after wave from a format in an edited perspective.
Yeah.
They were like, quick commentary on that wave, back off. There's another wave. Quick commentary on that wave. There was no back and forth between Barton and Lisa. And to me, that was like the draw card to watching and listening to them, was that we should have had that. And that was really missed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot, sorry, to just finish out that thought.
That's a great point.
Like that, those conversations happen because of the dead time in heat surfing. Because you get a flurry of waves, you talk through those waves really quick, and then suddenly you're sitting there for 10 minutes with nothing else to do. And then you get to hear that dialogue coming through from them. And it's when it's on point and it's to, the context of the heat, it's really interesting. And we really miss that.
Yeah, I think to follow forward from that thought, I think the location as well did make it a little bit difficult in terms of just execution in all of that. They couldn't quite, the judges were sitting on a boat over in the channel, so they didn't really ever get that front on angle of the surfers, which is really important in terms of being able to decipher actually how deep you were in the barrel, how complete that turn was. They were being able to look at it kind of side on. We did get some of that footage from the front to angle, but it was a little bit, and I think that's going to be something that inherently comes with being in such a remote location. Obviously, if we're comparing it, which I'm not meaning to compare it, but for comparison's sake, to let's say the angles that we get at WSL broadcast. So a lot of the reasons they choose the beaches that they do is because they're able to control that and control that they're able to create a broadcast viewership experience from it. And they were choosing this location purely for the quality of the wave and to be able to get footage of surfers in that. But on the flip side, there is that downside. And I don't think they were able to quite nail exactly all the angles of surfing that we crave actually as a viewership. And since this is entirely sold as like the package that you're watching, a post-produced package, those things probably could be cleaned up a bit in the next experience, or the next time they do this, especially to like the replays, the drone angles, trying to chase the replays, like finding which angles actually are the ones that we crave to watch again and again. Because every time they went to that drone replay, I was like, fast forward, or like rewind so I can watch the actual angle that I wanted to over again. And so I think those are like, nothing like resounding negative, and it's their first time. So they're learning and they're so remote. So it's not like they have all these like different angled camera towers that they're able to create this package. But that does come with some of those negative emotions from that.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. Like thinking through, kind of giving grace to that conversation, that part of it when it comes to like, it's the very first time they're running this. They're in a wild location. They're running it all off of boats.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
It's got to be extremely challenging, and it's very impressive that they could pull off what they pulled off. But also, we do have a high expectation of broadcasts when it comes to surfing, when it comes to the angles. I hate a drone on a wave to try and analyze anytime it's thrown at me. It doesn't matter what event I'm in, doesn't matter what the location is or anything anywhere in the world. The moment a drone angle is thrown in, I'm like, cool, if it's the 5th replay, that's fine. If it's a live wave, never give me a drone. If it's a replay that you actually, we need to like discuss, don't ever give us a drone because we cannot get any actual context to the height of the wave, the speed of the surfer, like all those things are missed. So I do feel like it will be interesting to see, next time around that this runs, if they bring it back, like what kind of modifications have they made? How have they, kind of reviewed on this in order to make their own production better? Because for sure those conversations are happening behind the scenes. What I will be the most curious, Rachel, to see if they are having discussions behind closed doors and if they make any positive changes towards is the fact that it was unequal numbers. Like, you're running a brand new thing, and it's with a handful of surfers, 12 total. Up the women's numbers by 4, give them equality, 16 surfers in total. It's not going to add that much time to an already a format of broadcast that's highly condensed. And we get to see 4 more incredibly talented women charging in this kind of format would be amazing. So the fact that they only had half the women, 4 women to 8 men was a massive downside to me, to the point where it made me lose a bit of respect for what they are so-called pushing in the future of competitive surfing, especially given the context now that WSL is actually going to be increasing their numbers. They're not going to equal numbers, but they are adding that increase in when it comes to 2026 tour. And like so many other events around the world now, just like women have opportunity. So many of them still don't, but I just felt like, oh, that's such a shame. Like, half the women, and Rachel, it actually then translated into, from a broadcast perspective, and what the audience got to experience was far less than half of the actual viewing time being on women themselves.
Yeah. For day one, it was like over a 3-hour entire program. And out of that, it was just 35 minutes of women surfing between their first and their second heat. So it did just translate into a lot less heat time as well. They only had 3 heats. The first one being all 4 of them. The second one being whoever got second, third, and fourth. So everyone but Milla. And then that final one just being Milla and Kira. And so it just got packaged up. I think especially too, like as those heats are going on and it's less and less surfers, and so therefore it's a condensed version of the heat, you're going to see less waves surfed potentially versus like a 4-person heat at the first one obviously would be the longest because there's more more waves to condense and review. So yeah, it did actually, out of all of that time, does package up to be not a ton of viewing opportunity.
Yeah, and when it comes to even like surfing opportunities, so women having half the surfers in this kind of format equated to them having little more than 1/3 of the actual surf session time. 3 women's sessions in comparison to 7 men's sessions from start to finish with the finals. So that's like, less than half the opportunity, even though there's half the numbers. The other thing that's pretty frustrating is the general consensus surfing world is that Milla Coker-Brown was the star of the whole thing. Like, really surfed well, found herself the right waves.
Which is not the frustrating part.
Not the frustrating part. The frustrating part is that she is the one person in the entire draw of the 12 competitors, men and women, who surfed less than everyone else. This is because every other surfer had at least 3 sessions because the men had more sessions due to the numbers. Milla, because she won her first heat, then only surfed in 2 heats, her first heat and the final heat. The fact that she had won the first heat meant she had to skip the second round, which was supposed to be this big advantage because she's going straight to the final. But it was kind of I don't know if you noticed this in the broadcast, Rach, but as the women were getting ready to, they're jumping on the boat that was going to drop them in the lineup for the second heat, which Milla wasn't surfing in, Milla jumped onto the boat just to ride out with them, just to get out there, to see the lineup again, to get a feeling with the girls. You could sense she was missing out on the fact that she wasn't even able to surf. And it was a punishment rather than an advantage to her, which was just such a bummer because we would have loved to see the standout of the entire event. We only got to see a handful of waves from across both heats.
Yeah. And to round that conversation out or loop it back around, I think that is a direct reflection because there were only 4 women. So there's only so much they can do with a format of that, trying to give the first place to have an advantage. But when you do only have 4 surfers, well, you can't run more rounds than that. So seeing less surfing of her is a direct reflection of the format that they're only allowed to have with that few women. So if you round that out a little bit more, get it up to 8 women, we get to see more surfing and more time spent, especially of those surfers, like in this instance of Mila and Kira.
Yeah, that's totally it. And I think too, to just kind of round out our conversation around natural selection, like there's some exciting elements to it. It was such a beautiful location. So even just seeing that on the broadcast is like, it's always nice when you've seen all the palm trees and the like crystal clear blue, green water, the reefs, all of the different things coming into it. And we know because of social media, we've gotten to just see so much cool content dropping in from each of the surfers that were taking part in it. And so we got to see some of the behind the scenes. A lot of the behind the scenes that the broadcast just decided not to include in, like the fact that Martin Daly during the women's final, I don't know, Rachel, if you were aware of this, but I can't remember where I heard it, but it's out there now. During the women's final, the boat like hit the reef or something and got a massive hole in it. He then had to dive off, like they put the women's final on hold. He had to dive off the boat, patched it up, which maybe it was Stab put an article or something out about it. It's like 9 out of 10 boats would go down. Water. While it's 100%. Like it's getting like it's out there bobbing around in the middle of the ocean. It's got the whole judging panel is like a lot of people are sitting on this boat as this happens. And he like jumps in the water, repairs the boat. He's also like, the father of remote boat wave discovery of surfing when it comes to locations like that. He's like one of like the greatest of all time in that conversation. But for him to like jump off the boat, repair it, save the people that are on the boat, saves the boat itself. Like 9 times out of 10, that boat's going down and everyone's swimming themselves back to shore or to like the friend's boat. Then to restart, like then call the women's final off hold and continue surfing in it. Like that would have been awesome to know in the broadcast. Like imagine imagine Barton finding that out when he's commentating and getting to talk about that. Like that kind of stuff to me, like it adds this like kind of psychotic element. It's funny when you hear the reactions of people, like all those kind of things. To miss out on a lot of that stuff was such a bummer. So I feel like there are a lot of gaps in what they produced and what they showed to us, as well as the one thing that was kind of like, I was getting a little bit like, ugh, every time that Nathan Fletcher would be like, all right, the surfers have just come out of the water. They've just gotten back on the boat. He's like doing an interview with them. And they're obviously trying to pump up the fact that this is like something new and they're trying to pump it up as the best thing ever. So he continues to say, you just got the best waves of your life out there, right? Like basically along those lines. And there's a moment where Kira's like coming from her heat and she kind of just like tried to dodge the question, like break eye contact, because she hadn't just gotten the best waves of her life. Like it was great and it was challenging and all of the things. But like we know the waves that these surfers are getting and these weren't the best waves of their life. Maybe if the conditions had been prime, like 100%, we would have been having that conversation. But that just wasn't it. And so it felt a little bit to me, it was like some of the frustrations we have with the World Surf League is that they think they're doing the best job ever. And that's the conversation that's it's this wall of positive noise, right? That's constantly being thrown at us of like, no one can even touch what we're doing. Natural selection came into it with that same high and that same energy of like, no one's doing what we're doing. This is the best thing ever. We're reinventing this. And it was actually a letdown in that kind of conversation rather than being like, hey, we're doing something different. Like, let's see how it turns out for the first time.
Yeah. Bringing a little bit more authenticity about the reality of it. I understand what you're saying there. And I got some of those just similar sentiments when I was watching, or like similar feelings as I was watching. Yeah, I think what you said, I mostly agree with, and I think that's no surprise because a lot of times, even when we're talking about, in terms of like what they included in the package and would have loved to see some of those other things, when we're talking about edits, we love to see edits that also incorporate a lot more of like overarching storyline and all the different things that come with the best surfers of the world all being together on a boat or in a remote place. And some of the things that come along with that, I think would have been maybe better served as like a more of an edit, like bringing all those people together and put together as like as an entertainment edit, maybe as a, and saying there was a contest element of this. I think all the bones are there. Overall positive takeaways in terms of it was nice to have something fresh. And I love to see those women surfing and who they chose put on the stage that it was. I was really eager to watch that. And I think it's a learning curve in terms of surfing is really unpredictable in terms of the ocean, in terms of conditions. And I'm sure where it's happened before, or the sports that it's happened before, and snow and all of that, they've just had more practice in terms of packaging that in a digestible way that is interesting and fun and exciting. And I think those are just the areas that have room for improvement, but I do hope that they try again and that they do it again.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think the concept is totally there. So let's see what happens with it next time. Let's get 4 more girls on the list. And I am all behind natural selection happening with equal numbers. Rach, that rounds us out for our conversation for today. Exciting stuff in the world of surfing, different formats, a lot of opinion that we could kind of bring into today's conversation, I think, which is fun. And yeah, I'm glad that we're kind of through the month of February with alternative types of surf events. And by the time we return for our next breakdown of contest conversation specifically, we will have seen Portugal and we'll be back into our sort of normal programming that the surfing world is ready to really digest.
Yeah, absolutely. A fun roundup of this month. I can't believe, again, we are in March already. And I am excited that I got to see you last month, Shan. I get to see you again. The plan is to see you again this month. And we can talk about that experience on our next episode. So thanks for today. And thanks for our listeners to listening, if you're still here.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in your ears shortly.
Bye.